Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today, we are going to talk about Disney's Pocahontas. Now, I just want to preface this discussion with the fact that, frankly, Disney really dropped the ball on their first Indigenous princess here. So because I try to give each princess a fair shake, this video will be largely about the 4 main ways Disney failed Pocahontas. First, in how she mimics, but does not replicate, the princess formula, then her meager character arc, how the story is barely about her, and how this reflects Native American representation in general. Let's get started. Now, I usually start off these videos with a discussion of the kind of hot takes one sees about the princess, generally about her as something little girls are going to see, and how that is definitely going to define the rest of their lives.
Pocahontas? Pocahontas?
But if there is discourse about Pocahontas, it is pretty much around its lack of historical accuracy, shall we say. Which I will get into a bit later. Instead, I want to start off by talking about what drove Disney to make this story, since it is pretty different from its predecessors.
These white men are dangerous.
Why do you think those insolent heathens attacked us?
Because we invaded their land and cut down their trees and dug up their earth.
Pocahontas was released in 1995 and was intended to finally get Disney that Best Picture Oscar, after Beauty and the Beast was nominated but lost to, let me check here real quick. Oh, Dances with Wolves. I wonder why this topic was chosen.
I mean, how many times have you seen Dances with Wolves? 100, 200? Oh, jeez.
The intention was then to take this important historical event, we'll get more into that loaded phrase later, and give it the Disneyfication process. And how did that work out? Because I'm gonna be honest right up front, rewatching Pocahontas for this video mostly just made me surprised by how boring it is. How safe, with not a lot of new ideas introduced. Like, I was all set to either defend it as one of my favorites as a kid, or really tear into it because of the real-world implications.
You see what I mean? Once two sides want to fight, nothing can stop them.
But, neither really seemed appropriate for something as unremarkable as this is.
Oh, he's so handsome.
I especially love the smile.
For example, we have our princess here, who is introduced doing her own thing. She's got some cute animal sidekicks who have a bit of an impact on the overall story. She's having some kind of conflict with her parent that sets up the narrative. She goes off to sing about what she really wants. Her love interest is this guy, who's shown being heroic. Love interest shows up in her world, and they later get to know each other. Then someone from her side shows up to cause trouble, and then the love interest is even more heroic. Okay, so Pocahontas does have things in common with the other princesses to fit that genre, but basically, this movie is almost exactly The Little Mermaid, which explains why it was a favorite of mine as a kid. Like, we start off with this ship scene introducing the prince character, then we zoom into this strange and unique culture before we find our princess. And then her friend has to come get her to go see her father. Now, I really want to get into Triton and Ariel's discussion, and Powhatan and Pocahontas's, because these scenes really highlight the difference in quality of storytelling. To summarize what I said in this video, what Triton and Ariel talk about here really gets at the central conflict of the whole story.
You could have been seen by one of those barbarians, by one of those humans.
But if you would just listen.
Not another word!
Ariel knows what she wants and is going to get it. She's driven to take bigger risks because her controlling father will not take her seriously, as established right here. The real end of the movie is triggered by him finally understanding her and giving her what he apparently had the power to do all along.
Then I guess there's just one problem left. How much I'm going to miss her.
I love you, Daddy.
This is a great moral for kids, by the way, because it emphasizes how Ariel is not a silly, idealistic child who doesn't know anything. She is proven correct. Triton's arc is learning that his prejudices are wrong and that he should believe his daughter, even if he's used to thinking he knows better.
What have I done? She really does love him, doesn't she, Sebastian?
Wow, that sounds like a great moral for a story about two sides clashing. All right, let's look at Pocahontas and Powhatan touching base here. He wants her to marry Kocoum. She does not.
Father, I think my dream is pointing me down another path.
This is the right path for you.
We get river symbolism for both of them, where he stands for the slow and steady approach.
As the river cuts his path, he will choose the smoothest course.
Pocahontas prefers more adventure.
He wants me to be steady, like the river. But it's not steady at all.
Great, so we set up this dichotomy. Except that's really vague and essentially just metaphorical. It doesn't really indicate how either of them are going to deal with the white folks showing up. Like, okay, I guess she will be more impulsive in trusting them while he wants to study them for a while first. And this, theoretically, resolves here when he learns from her.
This is where the path of hatred has brought us. This is the path I choose, Father. What will yours be?
But what path of hatred was Powhatan on? He wasn't set up as hating outsiders before this, like Triton is, and he reacted pretty naturally to one of his warriors being shot unprovoked. Like, sure, I guess he could have sent out a group to intentionally try for peace instead of just secretly observing the invaders, but that ignores the fact that we literally see the English make it pretty clear that they would not welcome any such overtures.
We shot ourselves an Indian.
Come on, Ben, it's just a little fun.
So this bland sort of setup where the two of them just have vaguely different approaches to life makes it so the ending is not earned.
I love him, Father.
She really does love him.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the respective I Want song for each princess.
I look once more just around the river bend, wandering free. Wish I could be
Ariel specifically wants to be
part of that world.
Pocahontas just generally wants life to be interesting, to be ready for something exciting.
Don't know what for.
But this makes Pocahontas a weaker character. Her I Want song doesn't really want anything.
My dreams again just around the river bend.
She just sort of thinks that maybe Kocoum isn't her future.
Should I marry Kocoum? Is all my dreaming at an end?
Which, for character motivation in a tight 90-minute feature, is a bit of a problem.
Grandmother Willow, I need to talk to you.
Okay, so then we make first contact with the love interest, and the plot follows a similar structure. The couple gets to know each other, there's a conflict as someone from her world shows up, the stakes raised to be life-threatening, the prince heroically saves the day, end of movie. But there are two main differences I want to point out. First, the conflict is entirely outside of our main characters, and it doesn't actually throw up many obstacles between them until the end. In contrast, Ariel's big character moment is here, using magic to get closer to Eric. At the same point in the story, Pocahontas uses magic to get closer to John, but it just sort of happens. Her action is to listen to her heart, not make a significant sacrifice like Ariel, who takes the story into her own hands at this point.
We have met. I knew it. You're the one I've been looking for.
But Pocahontas wasn't written to get a moment like that, and she isn't shown as being motivated in a similar way. She doesn't want to be like John or his people, and John Smith is more fleshed out than Eric, but definitely doesn't have the same kind of motivation. So if functionally Pocahontas and John Smith are not Ariel and Eric, who are they? Well, they are Romeo and Juliet. And I mean that in more than a vague, doomed romance kind of way. I mean it quite literally. Like, that was absolutely the blueprint for their characters. They're on opposite sides of a conflict, they fall in love, there's a significant character death that escalates things, they sacrifice themselves for love.
If you kill him, you'll have to kill me too.
But you may notice that our lovers don't actually die at the end. Instead, they are actively trying to solve the conflict.
Only when the fighting stops can you be together.
All right. Let's go talk to your father.
And that is not the point of Romeo and Juliet. The conflict resolves because of the tragedy of their senseless deaths brought on by the unfounded hate of their families. But do you really think that either of these people dying would have stopped Ratcliffe from searching for gold? Or Powhatan from defending his people? No, and Powhatan literally says he just won't start things, not that he won't finish them.
From this day forward, if there is to be more killing, it will not start with me.
So we aren't going to get the same catharsis at the end, which hinged on knowing both sides were wrong and now have learned the error of their ways because of the tragedy.
From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife.
So that brings me to the second thing I wanted to point out, and it also relates to the other princesses. This whole ending for Pocahontas and John Smith is maybe literally but not thematically similar to Romeo and Juliet, and does not match the Disney-fied rest of the movie. Romeo and Juliet die because they're just kids in an impossible situation that they can't escape no matter what they try. Sort of similarly, the other princesses are all striving for, and then actually get, a very personal happily ever after. But this movie is not trying to tell a character-driven story. It's trying to do social commentary. Remember, there's that Oscar to try to win. This is the first Disney princess movie to try for social commentary, so it does make sense that they would turn to Romeo and Juliet to help with that bit, as it has that cautionary tale built in. Except here's the thing. Ariel sees this separation of their worlds as an obstacle and resolves to cross it herself. She is not there to solve human and merfolk relations. She just wants to be part of your world. Similarly, Romeo and Juliet are not trying to resolve the blood feud between their families. They're just trying to be together, fully intending to run off and escape it entirely. So both of the sources of inspiration for this movie have protagonists who are actively seeking their own happily ever afters, with varying degrees of success, in spite of the two opposing sides that keep them apart. They become social commentary only because of the effects of their efforts. Romeo and Juliet teaches us not to get hung up on petty feuds, or we might lose something really important. Little Mermaid teaches us that finding your place in the world is essential, and sometimes means your relatives have to put aside their prejudices. Basically, all of the other princesses get a magical moment to give the character what she really wants. Snow White and Cinderella get to escape their abusive mothers through improving their social status. Aurora gets to take a nap while someone else sorts things out, and then marries the guy she wanted to anyway. Ariel feels out of place in her own skin and gets to find where she belongs. Belle wants someone to understand and to be appreciated for who she is, and that's what she gets. And to wrap this up, let's talk about Jasmine. She was the first princess of color, and as I mentioned in this video, she was not really designed to be culturally resonant. But one thing I praised about that is it meant she was almost not subjected to the harmful stereotypes she might otherwise have been. Instead, she gets to have a sweet and magical love story with a happily ever after. In contrast, Pocahontas is intended to be realistic and good representation, which means she was not written to have any humanizing flaws, like a temper or acting spoiled. Let's compare some of the flawed ways the other princesses get to react with how Pocahontas has to react instead.
Why, Doc, I'm surprised. How dare you? All of you, standing around deciding my future?
If you hadn't have run away, this wouldn't have happened.
If you hadn't frightened me, I wouldn't have run away.
You think I'm an ignorant savage? How can there be so much that you don't know?
I'm 16 years old. I'm not a child.
Don't you?
You don't even know him.
And the draperies.
But I just finished.
Do them again.
Then maybe I don't want to be a princess anymore.
Father, I think my dream is pointing me down another path.
This is the right path for you.
Where are you going?
Promise or no promise, I can't stay here another minute. Why don't you go tell my father? You're good at that. I'm just going to have to teach you a lesson.
This is the path I choose, Father. What will yours be?
She really isn't ever in the wrong. Since her relationship with her father is not antagonistic, she has no one to play off against as things get more serious, unlike John and Ratcliffe here. She's correct almost in a vacuum, so we don't even know until here that she's the one with the best approach.
The ripples.
What about them?
And of course, she does not get the main saving grace of Jasmine's story, the happy ending. Instead, she has to sacrifice herself to solve a conflict she had no part in starting.
I'm counting on you to make sure those filthy heathens don't disrupt our mission.
Let us hope they do not intend to stay.
Or escalating, for that matter.
These white men are dangerous.
I'll just have to take it by force then, won't I?
Like, Jasmine marries a poor guy. She doesn't have to solve poverty in Agrabah. Ariel marries a human. She doesn't lead merfolk-human relations. Despite ostensibly being rulers of kingdoms, really none of the princesses have to deal with any wide-scale political upheaval. Almost as if realism isn't what we want from a Disney animated feature. So Pocahontas is forced to shoulder the burden of the English and Native American conflict, but she has to be perfect while she does so because the white writers don't want to inadvertently make any comment about Native Americans. Except the moral that we should all just get along, you know, like 90% of children's media already says. What I'm saying is that you get a powerful story by having strongly motivated characters who cause change because of their passions, not with bland characters who are so safe and carefully designed that they have no flaws and basically never make any mistakes. Overall, the magical story of the first Indigenous princess leaves a lot to be desired. All of the magic that won Disney its prestige is stripped away to be important. And how did that Oscar bid go? Well, Alan Menken won for the score, and Colors of the Wind won Best Song. But that's basically the same as The Lion King the year before, so no real progress there for them. How sad. As Roger Ebert said, it's just fine for a family film. But Disney had been the gold standard of family films, basically crossing over to be great films for grown-ups too, for the last 4 that they released. This was definitely a departure from that, and I think it was because trying to go for that Oscar made them put aside what had worked for them before in favor of trying to be realistic. And failing spectacularly, of course, because this story isn't actually for children. It is trying to resonate with the adults watching by being big and important and having something to say about race relations. And it ignores what kids, or the kid in all of us, might actually want, which honestly is probably not to see this story told at all, but to do something with actual magic and wonder instead. But let's get into how that realistic approach affects the princess herself and Pocahontas' character arc in the film.
I was wrong, Grandmother Willow. I followed the wrong path.
Okay, for this section, we're going to discuss Pocahontas' own personal arc using Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey. Link below for more. The first step of the journey is to separate from the feminine. We meet Pocahontas up here, and then she hangs out with Nakoma, which is actually a really cool thing to finally be included.
Don't you think we're getting a little old for these games?
And really, I just wish Pocahontas and Nakoma's friendship was as strong as even, like, John Smith and Thomas's.
I could have killed you. Not aiming like that, you couldn't. Keep both eyes open when you shoot. You'll see twice as well.
both eyes open.
Anyway, so after this, Pocahontas is separated from her people. She did, however, start separated from her mother, and she gets to wear this symbolism that will come in handy later.
Your mother wore this for our wedding. It was her dream to see you wear it at your own.
But this is the start of her journey, being different from the rest of her tribe. Keep that in mind. The second step is where the heroine gains masculine allies. Now, she already had Miko and Flit, so I would say this step is when she meets John Smith. He represents a potential guide for her next few steps because he is knowledgeable about things outside of her experience.
It's got streets filled with carriages, bridges over the rivers.
He also, of course, represents the other side in the coming conflict, which essentially makes the English folks the masculine, while the natives are the feminine, sort of.
You think that, only because you don't know any better.
The third step is the road of trials, where the heroine relies on her masculine allies for a while. This includes all of the bits about getting to know John and discussing their respective cultures.
Have you ever heard the wolf cry to the blue corn moon?
It is also as she talks to her people about making peace, and they are not exactly on board.
Them did want to talk. You would listen to him, wouldn't you?
Pocahontas.
Wouldn't you?
And sneaking off to see John Smith. This movie is actually pretty light in terms of trials. It's a little strange, especially knowing where things are going to end up, that she is not directly involved in really any part of the brewing conflict. She arguably just stays in the winning masculine ally stage through most of the movie.
You have to go back.
But I can't leave you.
You never will.
Let's compare, for example, her to Ariel, who was not really involved in the main conflict either. She was off hanging out with Eric while things were escalating under the sea for both Triton and Ursula. However, again, she ends the movie by just trying to get what she wanted all along, not by trying to single-handedly solve the surface versus sea issue. If that is essentially what Pocahontas is going to do, why is she so separated from it? Why are her trials just hanging out with this guy?
That's not what I meant. Let me explain.
Let go!
No, I'm not letting you leave.
Savage is just a word. You know, a term.
Anyway, next we have the illusion of success. Basically, the heroine thinks her masculine allies are going to help her solve everything, but is then shown that they can't. And this is very brief. It is right here, where Pocahontas and John Smith have agreed that he will go talk to her father.
All right. Let's go talk to your father.
It is a success because it might work, but the whole framing of the scene shows how wrong they are.
What's wrong? Is she all right?
I think she's in trouble.
And if you happen to see any Indians, shoot them.
The fifth step is when the heroine experiences spiritual aridity and despair. Obviously, this comes on the heels of Kocoum's death. Pocahontas is devastated, pretty much everything is ruined, and there's no way their plan could work now. We can tell she's very upset because the necklace is broken here, symbolizing how very far from her mother and her people she has gone. It further emphasizes that separation from the feminine, and now she feels that her masculine allies have failed her.
All this happened because of me. And now I'll never see John Smith again.
Now the next step is the descent, where the heroine searches down deep to try to overcome her devastation. I would say that is here when she goes to see John Smith. There was actually a whole love song here originally, and it was cut because kids found it boring.
I would never have a clue.
Anyway, she goes to see John Smith to contemplate what she's going to do. The seventh step is when the heroine urgently yearns to reconnect to the feminine. Here, she goes to see Grandmother Willow to get advice, feeling led astray by John and his ways.
I followed the wrong path. I feel so lost.
What I'm saying is that she decides to go back to her roots.
My bark is worse than my bite.
So I was totally sure she got her necklace back before this pivotal scene, thus bringing her mother's spirit with her. And that's sort of implied, but she doesn't get the explicit symbolism back until the very end of the movie.
I was right. It was pointing to him.
The compass makes this bit actually more about this dude again, and means there is no reconnecting with the feminine to help her prepare for the climax. So that's not great. Ninth, Pocahontas makes peace with the masculine. First by saving John Smith's life, which he certainly appreciates. This then leads to peace with her father and potential peace with the settlers. John Smith ensures that, but yeah, peace all around. And the movie ends with her sort of in the last step, integrating the masculine and the feminine. She is assured of who she is and of her spirituality and has peace with the white folks. So her arc is basically resolved here. Alright, I actually have a few problems with this arc. First, as I mentioned in the last section, Pocahontas' conflict set up at the beginning does not relate to what then actually happens. Like, she is shown to be different from her tribe, which you would think resolves with her leaving, finding a place she belongs, like Ariel. Instead, she chooses to stay with her people, from whom she's been separated basically the whole film.
You must choose your own path.
I'm needed here.
And even if you want to say that they were constrained by history, I think we can both agree that there was no reason she couldn't have gone with John, except that maybe tragedies get more Oscars. So her resolution is pretty weak, and honestly, I feel it was a bit of a stretch to even use the heroine's journey for her.
A spinning arrow. How unusual.
Second, this whole ending is frankly kind of meaningless for her. Like, it's cool that she's willing to sacrifice herself for John, or peace, or whatever, but how does that fit in with her as a character and not just a blank avatar stuck in this situation? Contrast her with Ariel, who wants to be part of your world, and then is. Jasmine wants to marry someone of her choice, and then she does. Belle wants adventure, and she has one. You get what I mean. And remind me again, what does Pocahontas want?
I look once more, don't know what for.
Okay, so to be fair, let's compare that to Belle, because Belle isn't that specific either. She wants
Adventure in the great white somewhere.
but she also wants
To have someone understand.
So she has an adventure and definitely gets someone to understand. Pocahontas wants something. She doesn't know. Just to keep dreaming, I guess. And what does she get? Well, that guy she didn't like dies, so no danger of having to marry him.
But he's so serious.
And I don't know about you, but this whole story does not seem like a dream. It's not a fairy tale romance or anything. So I would say it's pretty unclear if she even gets what she wants or what she needs, since both are so ill-defined at the beginning. We end the story with her in the same spot as the start, kind of implying that she is unchanged and honestly still waiting for something just around the river bend. Great. So glad we spent all this time with her.
No! Not that way!
Finally, despite the much higher stakes in this story than really any other princess movie, they barely affect Pocahontas at all. Like, while both sides are plotting, she's off rolling in a field of daisies with this dude. She is present when Cocoam dies, but honestly, that's a bigger part of Thomas's arc than of hers. So, like I talked in the last section with Romeo and Juliet, Pocahontas is not Juliet because she does not take an active role in the story. Miko is the reason she meets John Smith in the first place.
You got a friend back there?
And then vague magic makes her able to communicate with him. Nothing tangible that she does. Speaking of which, the lack of magic is something I touched on in the last section, but here I want to mention how it really hurts her character by its lack. The other princesses were often facing insurmountable, if fictional, obstacles to their happy endings and needed a Deus Ex Machina solution, while they went for something more realistic here. So where the other princesses have these magical interventions, Pocahontas gets to understand another language and to run faster, I guess. And while other princesses may have been criticized for taking a less active role because of the outside force that saves them, I do think that misses the point of these stories. Like, it's literally wish fulfillment. Don't you wish a fairy godmother or a genie would come along and remove the obstacles for your happy ending? Almost as if these were intended for children who tend not to have a lot of power over their life choices. Instead, Pocahontas is a princess who essentially has to have the weight of the world on her shoulders and has to fix everything by herself. Sure, that means she has more power and influence than her peers, but I see that as more of an unfair burden. It sort of implies that if you find yourself in the middle of a conflict, it is your noble task to be a good example and solve it alone, even if no one involved is willing to listen to you.
Maybe we should try talking to them.
They do not want to talk.
I'm sure it was meant to be empowering, but even the only magical creature in the film is telling her this is her responsibility.
You have to stop them.
I can't.
You don't have a magic wand or anything, Grandmother Willow?
Like a wave upon the sand.
You can't just make everyone listen with their hearts?
You will understand.
Anyway, so that is not a great message for kids. The general idea that we should all just get along is a fine message, but making it your job to ensure everyone else gets along is kind of a big ask for a child.
I followed the wrong path. I feel so lost.
Now, I suppose that a magical solution was not included because it might be in bad taste to suggest this real-life event could have been solved by some magical force showing up. But what is the point of Disneyfying this story if you're not gonna do that? This movie is definitely not wish fulfillment, and even though she was one of my favorites as a kid, I never wanted to be in Pocahontas' shoes. I mean, I only had a Pocahontas doll and never saw the need to include a John Smith one while I was playing, which I'm going to retroactively say was because I understood what was actually wrong with the movie. How little Pocahontas is given to do compared to her co-star, which is why I was very happy to just make up my own stories for her.
And now I'll never see John Smith again.
Perfect, Wiggins. I couldn't have planned this better myself.
So sure, she takes a big step here at the end, but it, one, does not match up with any of her character motivation in a tangible way, and two, is a little too late for her to finally do something on purpose, you know?
This is the path I choose, Father.
It's almost like there is a magical influence in this story, but instead of it helping our princess, it is our princess. So if she is the Deus Ex Machina solution, who is this story really about?
I'm John Smith.
So let's get into how this movie is set up. As I've said, Pocahontas is not getting the standard Disney princess story. Her love triangle is tragic. Her love interest leaves. She barely gets an arc. So whose story is this really? Because it doesn't feel like it's hers. We start the movie with John Smith and company leaving England and see their adventures on the way. It's 6 minutes in before we see a Native American, which may not seem like much, but let's really compare these two groups. In England, we have already met and essentially established 5 or 6 of the English characters. You can tell who they are in the story, and with the possible exception of these two for comic relief, you would not get anyone mixed up with someone else. John is the manly hero.
Leave the savages to me.
Ratcliffe is the villain. Wiggins is his toady.
Stirring oration, sir.
I'll need those witless peasants.
Thomas is the baby.
If any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
These two are regular Joes.
You think they'll give us much trouble?
Not as much trouble as Smith'll give them.
All right, then we go to this distant, mysterious foreign land. We see ways to fish, entertain children, play games that are not at all familiar with the majority of the audience. So we are already in new territory. Then even though we see many characters, none of them are given any clear personalities for us to follow. We don't even know which of these warriors are going to die later. We don't see Kocoum, just Powhatan and Kakata, and I would say they are established well in this scene.
It's good to be home.
We essentially know their relationship for the rest of the movie, but that's a much smaller percentage of characters. Also important is how everyone talks. Most of the people watching are going to find John the most relatable.
I'm not about to let you boys have all the fun.
Then the other English accents.
Coming on this voyage too?
Of course he is, you halfway.
And then the Native Americans, who we might feel are overly formal or stilted in how they speak.
Chest Chummy! The Massawomics are defeated!
Your return has brought much joy to the village.
So even though the audience is predominantly Americans, we're going to identify with these goofy British dudes right away. And the Native Americans, well, possibly never. This story sets up numerous contrasts between the English and the natives. When John Smith and Pocahontas are getting to know each other, we get these scenes.
How long are we going to keep digging like this, sir?
A man's not a man unless he knows how to shoot.
This wound is strange to me.
Hands! Steady! Steady! There you go!
That'll keep everything out, eh, John?
Wasn't me, it was the tree.
Oh, of course. The tree just felt like lifting its roots. The warriors are here.
But again, the English are doing quirky or funny things, while the Native Americans are always, well...
Indians ain't supposed to smile like that. Get stoic. You gotta look mean or people won't respect you. White people will run all over you if you don't look mean.
But he's so serious.
We feel for Thomas, the bumbling idiot, but we don't feel anything for Kocoum or even Powhatan. They do not do anything for us to empathize with them, I mean.
Kocoum, but he's so serious.
I know.
I mentioned earlier how nice it was for Pocahontas to have a female friend, a rarity among Disney princesses.
I was worried about you. I thought I was doing the right thing.
But it is not used in a way that makes us understand Pocahontas' life before the English came.
Well, you better be all right, because I'm not coming in after you!
You can't fight Indians without John Smith.
Well done, Smith.
Of course. Leave the savages to me. I've seen hundreds of new worlds, Thomas. Well, if they're anything like the savages I've fought before, it's nothing I can't handle.
Because this movie is really about John Smith, isn't it? He starts out like this and ends like this.
No!
Unlike Pocahontas, who starts and ends the movie in the same place, his relationship with Thomas is important. The villain is much more relevant to him than to Pocahontas.
Tried for treason and hanged. Fine, I'll settle this myself.
No!
And of course, this huge scene for Pocahontas, where she is willing to sacrifice herself, is undercut by John Smith literally sacrificing himself. Given that they certainly designed the movie around this moment, why take its impact away from her so quickly?
My daughter speaks with the wisdom beyond her years, but she comes with courage and understanding.
John!
I'm sure it was written as an equal thing, but John Smith is much more active and has an actual consequence. Pocahontas is not injured, and we don't see this as changing her life in any tangible way. I mean, I would say the princesses often do not get to do a lot in the climaxes of their films, and it is nice that she gets to do something. I just don't like that her actions are not as weighty as what this man does moments later. So while I could spend some time comparing this movie to actual history, it was pretty clear that the writers were not interested in that anyway. Instead, I am more interested in how this movie is framed. We start on these guys, and we may end on a shot of Pocahontas, but it is really there to reinforce how she changed their lives, not hers. Snow White is not about how snow impacted the dwarfs. Aladdin is not just about how Jasmine affected the title character. She has her own thing. The Beast has the biggest character arc, obviously, but interacting with Belle is what drives the plot. And here we have Pocahontas, which is quite literally the story of a white man, as in a story this dude probably made up. I put some links in the description all about that. But this story was taken from English accounts written years after the possible events instead of the natives' oral history or contemporary records, and the only character arc in the movie reflects that.
What could possibly be different about this one? I'd rather die tomorrow than live 100 years without knowing you.
We don't get to know Pocahontas' family. We don't have a day in the life. She has a friend, which is nice, but she does not spend much time with her. Like, I was actually surprised when this man spoke English.
Be quick.
Because so much of the other scenes of the natives makes it clear that they are
not like you.
And then we finish the story on how Pocahontas changed things for the white men here.
You are always welcome among our people.
Basically, what I'm saying is that she's a manic pixie dream girl.
She goes wherever the wind takes her.
Show off. How can there be so much that you don't know?
If I never knew you.
And that's a pretty big problem. That kind of feeds into the noble savage trope, because she just understands nature better, you know?
But I know every rock and tree and creature.
And so we have the character arc of a white guy who just needs to get in touch with that side of himself, while even the most dramatic moment for our princess is just saving him.
I was right. It was pointing to him.
She theoretically sacrifices herself, but not in the way that Romeo and Juliet do, or even Ariel does. It's really just about him.
I love him, Father.
So sure, the natives have a few humanizing moments, but mostly they are just shown to us as outsiders, like the merfolk. Except this is a fantasy race, and these are real people who existed. So I think it's time to unpack that. Okay, so I did not talk very much about cultural representation in Aladdin because, well, the filmmakers were obviously pretty uninterested in accuracy, and it's not something where I can add to the conversation. But this movie was trying to be good representation, so I just wanted to touch on the ways it fits into how Hollywood depicts Native Americans.
It appears I've selected the perfect location, eh? Not a savage in sight.
Well, just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not out there, sir.
And allow me to tell you a little story to start that off. Once upon a time, in 2016, my boyfriend and I went to see Suicide Squad. This movie is not good for a whole lot of reasons, but we're going to discuss one in particular. So my boyfriend, who is half Navajo, was really looking forward to seeing Slipknot, played by Adam Beach. Now, Adam Beach is...
Hey, Victor, sorry to hear about your dad.
Hey, Victor, what do you remember about your dad?
Yes, Victor, in a movie that is pretty important to this conversation, Smoke Signals. It was released in 1998 and is considered the first feature-length film written, directed, and produced by Native Americans. Adam Beach himself is pretty iconic as a First Nations actor, both for his numerous roles over the years in mainstream Hollywood and for his work as a producer and philanthropist.
I'm pretty lucky to be the Hollywood Indian.
So anyway, my boyfriend was pretty thrilled to see a prominent Indigenous person appearing in such a big movie franchise. And then this happens.
Mind games.
What's that?
Oh, this bomb in the neck crap. That ain't real, mate. Question is, are you coming? Yeah, smart. Hold your fire!
And I'm not saying he was devastated, because is generally a real bad movie, but it was certainly disappointing. And it essentially caused us to start really paying attention to how Native Americans are represented in movies and TV.
Here comes Slipknot, the man who can climb anything. Wonderful.
So it was pretty in vogue in the 90s to see Native Americans as these magical creatures who understood Mother Nature in a way us white folks don't.
During the 60s, Arnold Joseph was the perfect hippie because all the hippies were trying to be Indians anyway.
But pretty much in the same way as a magical Negro trope, I'm not going to unpack that today, but basically natives were seen as sort of benevolent fae creatures instead of, human beings who might be the protagonist of a story.
You're always trying to sound like some damn medicine man or something. I mean, how many times have you seen Dances with Wolves?
It reminds me of this fantastic TikTok.
Is that my cousin over there? Let me wave at him and see if he notices.
Look over there, Timothy. It's a native. He's blessing the land. Well, gosh dang it, Timothy. Take off your dang hat. Show some respect.
This is such an honor. Nah, that's not even him.
This is what good representation looks like to me. Like, it is obviously based on his real experiences and the perceptions people have of him, and turns it on its head so we actually empathize with him, even if we may be more like Timothy.
He talks a lot about this stoic Indian as well, and plays on that, been hoping to educate others, and how many people falsely perceive us Native Americans as being this stereotype.
What I'm saying is that I find Pocahontas the movie very frustrating because they could have chosen to tell a great tale that included the Native American perspective just by adapting something from the mythology of really any tribe. And they ignored all of those to pick out the story of some white guy that he probably made up originally. So yeah, production went out of its way to cast Native actors in the Native roles. The art design is very good, and the natives look like natives, compared, for example, to the ones in Peter Pan.
Teach 'em, pale-faced brother, all about Red Man.
Their costumes are quite accurate, as is what we see of their lives.
You gotta look like a warrior. You gotta look like you just came back from killing a buffalo. But our tribe never hunted buffalo. We were fishermen. What? You want to look like you just came back from catching a fish?
But at the end of the day, the only deaths are a couple of native men. Even our villain doesn't die, and that's pretty common for Disney to allow. Native American characters are othered, not treated like regular people we could understand and empathize with, while the British men are portrayed relatably. I was honestly surprised when I watched it on Disney Plus that it didn't have the same warning as Aladdin does, especially for lines like this.
From filthy little heathens, here's what you get when races are diverse. Dirty shrieking devils, a hellish red. They're only good when dead.
Why would you put that out into the world when Native Americans are real people who exist in the country where most people watching this live? Like, the natives are saying stuff like this.
The paleface is a demon. The only thing they feel at all is greed.
But this is how we were introduced to them.
I'm gonna get a pile of gold.
They see how I glitter.
And then there's this.
I wonder if they even bleed.
But the British are calling them vermin.
They're vermin, as I said, and worse.
These are not the same, even for the sanitized setting of the movie.
They're different from us, which means they can't be trusted.
They're not like you and me, which means they must be evil.
More importantly, Pocahontas was made in 1995. Pocahontas herself was from the Pamunkey tribe of Virginia. Any guesses when that tribe was federally recognized by the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs? Put your guess in the comments. Has everyone commented? Yeah, it was in 2015. More than 2 decades after this movie came out, and her tribe was still not recognized by the federal government. The insidious problem of how Hollywood represents natives is that it obscures the timeline of history. My boyfriend's mother and her siblings were taken away from their parents to be placed in a boarding school run by white people, because that was just what was done, literally up until this Disney movie was released. And does it address any of the issues natives were facing as it was created? Did their research go past the 1600s? Nope. It does not in any way suggest that the natives are any different from the merfolk in The Little Mermaid. or dwarves and fairies in other Disney movies.
When I'm in Hollywood, they want to see that, oh, hey, hey, ha, or whatever they call it, but they don't want to see, you know, us now. It's like, that's the mentality that's out there, and we have to change it, you know?
Yeah.
They like us in the 1800s.
Wow, they like us in the 1800s.
Yeah.
They like us in the 1800s, too.
All I'm saying is that if your story is just going to use Native Americans as a way for the white man to develop, to get in touch with his spirituality, or to learn something important about nature, maybe you should just use some blue cat aliens instead, so you don't inadvertently teach the audience that all of these issues are resolved, actually.
They're not savages. They can help us. They know the land. They know how to navigate the river.
So, to wrap this up, what really surprised us about Suicide Squad was that it was a new movie. It wasn't made in an era where this Sicilian man pretended to be native to get you to stop littering, but Adam Beach is just there to develop the plot for their characters and disappear. Actively worse than Cocoam 20 years earlier. So while Pocahontas herself is a pretty good representation of a Native American woman, that is only because the bar was so low it was in hell previously.
Say when first great married squaw, he came out with heap big mouth when he saw his mouth. He'd kiss a maid and start to blush, and we've all been blushing since.
Squaw, get him firewood.
Squaw, no, get him firewood. Squaw, go home.
If you want to see a good story with a Native woman, you can watch Smoke Signals, in which Irene Bedard herself stars, or more recent projects like Reservation Dogs, Prey, or even Hawkeye, where the Native American women are treated as people, not magical influences who just get it better than you do, man. So, overall, it is great that they made an effort to include Native Americans in the voice cast. Definitely a step forward from Aladdin, but the plot is a step backwards. Pocahontas is about as impactful as Aurora and comes with a lot more racial baggage that was not present in the previous movies. The film does have the positive quality of suggesting that Native American characters are good and right, but Jasmine was much better because it framed her as normal instead of otherworldly. At the end of the day, Pocahontas is a manic pixie dream girl for a white dude, and that is pretty hard to get around, no matter how good the rest of the representation may be. Basically, hiring Native Americans was a big deal at the time. It was a good step, but it can't be your only step. So, as much as this kind of representation is not in my wheelhouse, it does line up with what is really the message of this channel, talking about how good representation means more than just casting. Hiring a real-live actress does not save something from being misogynistic, and hiring Native actors does not mean it won't be problematic. Diversity only in who appears on screen is not enough. If they do decide to do a live-action remake someday, I hope they are planning on changing a lot of the story.
You have to stop them.
I can't.
So, finally, regardless of the movie as a whole, is Pocahontas a good role model? Honestly, even though Jasmine was the first non-white princess, that seems like a much more loaded question here, because I think this movie was trying so hard to make her into a good role model at the expense of making her seem like a real person. I would say she's not a bad role model. Again, the main moral is that we should all just get along, and that's a pretty tried and true moral for kids' shows. She does not generally follow the same tropes that Native American women are so often relegated to. She does have a role in the plot and is not just like Tiger Lily, for example, but there are some problems. Her maturity and, well, sexiness, for example, is just as troubling as Jasmine's. The white princesses are treated as pretty sexless, just going in for one or two chaste kisses, while these two are much more presented as adults, fully capable of getting up to some stuff. Even though all the other ladies are married at the end, and these two are not, so that's pretty troubling. As these two Native women pointed out,
the fact that it exists, I think it's a dangerous depiction, especially of Native women.
It further engraves those stereotypes that
somehow Native women all dressed like that sexy, like way back then.
And of course, the fact that her arc is more to serve John Smith's than to develop her as a person is not great. So I guess I will just answer this question using my own personal experience. This was a pretty important story for me as a child living in the Western United States to see Native Americans as people with wants and needs instead of just decorations in my house. But it certainly leaves a lot to be desired to rewatch it now.
6-year-old me would say strongly disagree, because I saw a Native woman and it was a happy romanticized, story of Pocahontas. But as I've grown up, I've done more research on her story and what's happened to her.
See the good in it, I could see natives on the screen, but then you have songs like Savages, Savages, Barely Even Human. There's like bullshit like that's in there. I liked it when I was a child, but as an adult, nah.
So is she a good role model? Well, I think we have much better options nowadays, like the ones I mentioned before, Moana, which is basically a remake of Pocahontas, and Spirit Rangers on Netflix. So yeah, I would skip this one. I like to wrap these up with a book recommendation, particularly in this case. Look for Light Finder by Aaron Paquette, especially if you like Stranger Things. Thank you for listening to me talk about, another of the Disney princesses. Next time, we are celebrating the 20-year anniversary of The Two Towers by talking about Éowyn. Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, join my Patreon, buy me a coffee if you like what I'm doing. All those things so you don't miss it. See you then.